Hello, welcome to another episode of History Hack. We're very, very, very excited today. Alex, tell us who we got.
Oh, this is going to be good today. Today we have Ricky Phillips with us, who is a military historian, blogger, and award-winning author. You may know him by his most recent book, which is The First Casualty, The Untold Story of the Falklands War, and that's what we're going to do today. What we're going to do is actually bust some myths about the war. Ricky, how are you doing?
I'm really, really good, and thank you so much for having me on the show. I've been quite a big fan of it, so I've been looking forward to today.
Oh, brilliant. So what we're going to do, basically, is obnoxiously chuck statements at you, and you're going to tell us whether they're true or not. So should we just get cracking straight away?
Yeah, sure. Do you just want me to shoot them down, or do you want me to just true or not true game show style, or actually go into them
let's do a bit of game show, like with the immediate answer, but then you can break it down for us and tell us the truth behind it. So what if I was to say to you, the Falklands War was all about oil?
Definitely not true. So, I mean, this is said by so many people, it was all about oil. I mean, one of the most obvious things is we're 39 years now, more or less, down the line from the Falklands War, and still people like Rockhopper and other companies, they're saying they're doing tests and they're going, there might be oil. We don't know how much. We don't know if it's profitable. We don't know how deep down. I mean, this is nearly 40 years further on. And you can find, in the early 80s, a lot of it, the subject had been mentioned, and a lot of UK politicians, they were still talking about if oil and gas were found. It was not a big news. A few people had sort of said something. There wasn't a nothing, but I mean, it was just so far removed from anything to actually do with the war. The concept of oil on either side is silly. I mean, if you said it now, people go, okay, maybe. If the same scenario happened like now, 40 years later. But back then in 1982, no, it absolutely wasn't about oil. There were guesses that there might be some. That was it. Certainly not enough to go to war over. And last year I was at a wonderful major Falklands War event or symposium called the FM37 at Manchester University. And I watched a lovely lady, wonderful historian, Grace Livingston, absolutely destroy this idea that it was about oil at all. And I'm sure Grace could do it 10 times more justice than I can, but I can absolutely guarantee you the Falklands War was not about oil. Simply, they guessed there might be some, but nobody really knew. It was a big if. And in fact, it wasn't even a big if. It was a very, very small if somewhere out there. It was nothing to do with the war.
I can't really see a nation going to war over what if.
Yeah, exactly. There was nothing really in it. I mean, there's the whole Coalites connection to do with Dennis Thatcher, and there was a company that he had major shares in. And I never believed this concept when Maggie Thatcher said that the Falklands invasion came out of the blue, and her and Dennis had to look on a globe or a world atlas to find where the Falklands were. Rubbish. That was rubbish. And certainly there was profit, or there was things to be guarded in the Falklands, but none of it really was to do with oil. And certainly any concept that dear old Maggie had anything to do with it being about oil, it's not even a factor. It won't stop it being raised as a subject again and again, but I can absolutely guarantee you myself and better people than I who have really studied into this can absolutely tell you it was not about oil.
Okay, so we got number 2, and it is about Maggie Thatcher.
She just comes into it, doesn't she?
She always comes into this. Right, so Maggie Thatcher demanded the deactivation codes for Exit, if I'm all right, if I've pronounced that. Exocet missiles from President Mitterrand under the threat of nuking Buenos Aires.
Okay, so Mitterrand was the president. This story now, I know where this story comes from, and it was a story, I want to say it was in The Guardian. It was November 2005, and it was this whole big thing Thatcher threatened to nuke Buenos Aires if she wasn't given these codes for the Exocet. Quick answer, no, absolute rubbish. That one, again, is a myth. Where it came from, so as I said, I believe it was The Guardian. It was certainly November 2005, the story. And it was in relation to the promotion of a book called Rendezvous by a man called Ali Magoudi. Now, Ali Magoudi had been President Mitterrand's psychoanalyst between, I think, 1982 and 1984. And now Mitterrand died in 96. And after Mitterrand died, there was this whole swathe. People waited a few years, and then this whole swathe of books all about him and things he supposedly said or supposedly did. Of course, they can't back them up. Ali Magoudi, I believe he was a psychoanalyst. He was employed in a medical or doctoral, capacity. He certainly shouldn't have even breached the confidentiality, but that just goes to show he was out for the money. How do I know that this is absolutely not true? Very, very simple answer. Exocet missiles do not have codes. There is no such thing as a deactivation code for an Exocet missile. The man who designed them, Jean-Emile Stauff, never designed them with a code. And there is no such thing as something you can tap a few buttons and, oh, look, it goes away. The Exocet missiles are still manufactured today. In fact, my brother used to work for MBDA Missile Systems not too long ago. And, they still manufacture or part manufacture the Exocet, and they still, 40 years later, do not have codes. So there are no codes for Exocet missiles. It's simply a myth that was put out there to sell a book from a man who didn't really know. The reason Ali Magoudi put this out there, Exocets were still very, people didn't know all about this stuff, and he just put it out there and thought, oh, that sounds good. There are no codes to Exocets, then or now or ever. There is no
I love how emphatic that is. It can't be true because there are no codes.
Yeah, that is the most simple thing. If Mitterrand told him that, I'd be surprised, but then Mitterrand was fibbing. And of course, Mitterrand he would have known anyway, because his brother was on the board of Aerospatiale, who made the Exocet. So he would have known. And now, did Thatcher threaten to nuke Buenos Aires? Maybe that's a second thing. You can find, and I've seen them, you can find reports on the feasibility of, and we looked at every single option during the war, of what it would take to bomb Buenos Aires. What it would
that's
take.
Just wargaming, isn't it? It doesn't mean you want to do it or you intend to do it.
Yeah, a nuclear option, not on Buenos Aires, by the way, potentially somewhere around Tierra del Fuego. A nuclear option was mooted, but in such a way as, and just when the war had pretty much started, a nuclear option was looked at, but that's because you look at every single option. And in fact, if you looked at the various other options that we were considering at this time, I'll give you a great one, based on a guy in the dockyard who apparently didn't have a name but was bribable or pliable. We were going to somehow parachute a special forces team with some ship's engineers onto the deck of the 25 de Mayo, the Argentine carrier, to take the carrier and sail it out of their port and steal it for their very noses. This was a plan we considered. So if you think of how stupid that idea was, you can see how many other options were put on there on the table. And a nuclear option was one of hundreds, even thousands of crazy ideas that just got scrapped. They looked at every option. So, yeah, the nuking Buenos Aires was never going to happen. And Exocets still don't have codes. I think we've covered that.
I think we have, but unfortunately there's still more Maggie bashing to come. Poor Maggie. Like Marmite, isn't she? Another one that's levelled at her is that she started the Falklands War to win an election.
Yeah. This is one, I guarantee you in 40 years' time, you'll still see it on the internet. Maggie started that war to win an election, she did. No. Quick answer, no. How do I know this? So, I mean, I have a copy of every bit of signals intelligence, every flash telegram, you name it, from a year before the Falklands War kicked off. And every single one, with growing urgency, when South Georgia starts becoming a bit of an issue and things like that, every single one says, do not provoke the Argentines. Do nothing to provoke the Argentines. Whatever you do, don't provoke the Argentines. We don't want any hostility or any cause for hostility. Thatcher did not want any kind of war, but she wasn't blind to the situation, but she had to play the situation to her advantage, or she had to play with the cards she was dealt. Now, you've got to think back here in early 1982. I mean, now to us, she's Thatcher. She's the Iron Lady. I met her once, and I in my mind, she was 7 feet tall, and she wasn't. She was only about 5'8" or something like that. But she was this huge dominating figure when I met her. And because that's the image we have of her. But back then, in the very early 1980s, she was that woman. We'd never had a female prime minister. Everyone said she would be useless. It's not a job that a woman can do. She will fold at it. And that's what a lot of people, and we'd started with the things like the Iranian embassy siege. They'd given her this name, the Iron Lady. They'd realized that she had a bit of backbone. But a lot of people wanted Thatcher out. Now, there's a very interesting thing, which, to be honest, history hasn't really covered it quite a lot, and they should. If you want to know what's behind the Falklands War, is the thing. I think it was historian Hugh Byshano, a lovely man. I've spoken to him a few times as well. But Hugh Byshano termed it the Whitehall War, and it really was. So when people say the British government, really, in the context of the Whitehall War, there was no such thing. It was the government, if you will, and the FCO, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And the FCO they were the old mandarins very much of the government, and they very much enjoyed their position as being able to make or break a prime minister. And the Falklands was going to become the sacrificial stone for that woman. Now, after the FCO pretty much fell, and of course after the war, Thatcher was, reigned supreme. She could do anything. There were 2 letters found in FCO files, and these are quite interesting. The first says that this woman prime minister, how dare she be a woman? She has been weak-kneed. She's allowed the Argentines to take the Falklands. She hasn't responded. It's a national disgrace, and therefore she must resign. The second letter, dated the same day, says this ridiculous, rash woman has thrown us irresponsibly into this war for the Falklands. We have lost, and now it's a national disgrace, and therefore she must resign. So the bottom line is, now my guess, and I will say this as a guess, my guess is that she knew about it. If she hadn't read the letters, she was certainly aware that she was being cornered. And Thatcher, if you actually look at what's happening in the run-up to the Falklands War, she's almost, something you wouldn't think of Maggie doing, but she almost put her head in the sand and was like, just maybe it won't happen. Maybe it will just go away and this will not be an issue. And she was literally between a rock and a hard place. Then Argentina invades, and it wasn't Thatcher who said, right, war. Thatcher was looking around going, what do we do? And I tell you, the person who wanted the war, who knew the war was coming, was Admiral Sir Henry Leach. And it was Admiral Sir Henry Leach who walked in his full attire into the Houses of Parliament, where he knew Maggie was, and he walked in there, and he literally jumped the chain of command. He knew it was coming. In fact, to give you an idea, Operation Corporate, which was the mission to recover the Falklands for us, it even had a name, and it was actually moving several days before the Argentines invaded. And that was all to do with Henry Leach. He had made sure, he'd said it was a little bit of prescience, a little bit of experience. He just liked to make sure that a few of the ships were maybe sitting around Gibraltar and had just been brought home, and everyone was Leach knew what was coming, and Leach needed desperately to reverse the 1981 Defence White Paper, which had just destroyed everything the Navy had, and it was going to destroy jobs. And there were admirals' sons who had been promised promotions, and the Navy has this wonderful history and tradition of looking after itself. And Leach realized that the Navy was basically going to be reduced to nothing. And he knew what was coming. And when that war came, he went straight into Thatcher's office and he said, "You must act." And she said, "Why?" And he said, "Because if you do not, and if we pussyfoot in our actions and are not resolute, in a month from now, you will be living in a different world and in a different country where our word counts for nothing." And he literally reached out his hand as the proverbial olive branch and said to Thatcher, "Come with me, I've got this." And Thatcher grabbed it with both hands. She suddenly saw Leach was like the Archangel Gabriel turning up, and she thought, "Thank God this man is talking to me with such confidence. We can do this." And a lot of the people from the Army and the Air Force were looking at Leach and saying, "What does he know that we don't?" And it's actually, this wasn't the first time Leach had done this. Leach was desperate. The Cod Wars before this, the third Cod War, we'd been embarrassed in the previous two. And Leach as good as started the third Cod War just to go, right, we need to go out there and do something. And again, they were moving before the government knew anything about it. And this was a ramming war over cod. This wasn't the Falklands War. Leach needed something. He knew exactly what he was doing. And it was not Thatcher starting the war to win an election. She literally had her head in the sand. She was cornered. The wolf was at the door. And she realized she had nowhere to go, and in strides Sir Henry Leach and says, "Come with me, I've got this." Leach had his own reasons, but it was nothing whatsoever to do with Thatcher.
Do you know what I did the most, as someone who's not old enough to remember her being in charge? I just about remember her fall, and only because I saw things my parents were watching on TV and stuff. But the thing that offends me most about her is Gillian Anderson's overdone accent in The Crown.
Oh, it just sounds like she's been drinking lemon juice. It's like, it's horrible.
It's bad. It's like a panto. But
I think The Crown has gone, as a series, has gone beyond panto, and I think a lot of people have stopped watching it. It's just got ridiculous. And the worst bit is people, I don't know how, people are assuming this show, The Crown, is like a documentary.
Yeah.
And it isn't,
It's just flat out mean now.
Yeah.
But I as someone who wasn't there to see her, I don't get how angry she makes some people. But I think you've done a great job of dispelling a couple of anti-Thatcher things, at least to do with the Falklands War there.
I hope so. And, Thatcher was, even though I'm speaking today from Edinburgh, Thatcher was my MP. I'm from Whetstone, North London, and she was MP for Whetstone and Finchley and what have you. She was our MP, and I remember she was an amazing MP. Anyone who needed anything done, the bins, the street lights, or, I know it's council, but she'd still go with it. There was a lady next door whose husband had been killed by a trucker from somewhere in Europe, and basically they had said that this country had basically not been inclined to help pursue him. And my neighbour, Tina, I remember, she got in contact with Thatcher, and Thatcher went, she's the Prime Minister, and she's running a large section of not just the UK, but, world affairs and everything. She was a major player. And there's Thatcher still going after some trucker. She brought him to justice. She was an incredible MP for us. And even people have a go about the poll tax. My family were better off under the poll tax, so I have nothing against Thatcher at all. And having met her, I think she was absolutely wonderful. And in fact, I'll impart something to you or to anyone else. I was when I met her, I'm 42 now. I was in my sort of late teens, and a chap who worked for the Enfield Southgate Conservative Association just sort of went, "Ricky has a question," and just shoved me at her. And like I said, I remember her being like 7 feet tall, even though she wasn't. And I came up, I mumbled like the most god-awful thing, it's something like "What's your secret?" or this total facepalm moment, because I wasn't prepared for it. And I remember she sort of produced this finger, and it looked like this sort of this icicle aimed at your heart, and she started stabbing me in the chest with it, and she said, "You must have a hot meal," she said. And I thought, do I look underfed or something? But she's stabbing away, and I mean, with every syllable. And apparently she was giving her secret. And she said, "Whatever you do in life, before you decide to attempt it, you must have a hot meal." Stab, stab, stab. I'm quite sure she drew blood. To this day, I've taken that advice, and I tell you, it's really good advice, and it does work. And apparently that was her secret. I left literally bloodied and bruised, but feeling very, very proud of myself. I think it was about 17 or 18.
That is outstanding.
So, okay, let's move away from Thatcher, because we're going to start probably bashing another country. So our next one is France.
Oh, you've got to bash them, haven't you?
It's British. It's in our blood.
It's a national sport. It's considered patriotic. It's a duty. But go on, please.
So France helped Argentina in the war. Yay or nay?
Definitely no. I'm going to say definitely, and then I'm going to say but. I mean, first off, France were they were straight on the money. They backed us in anything to do with the UN. They backed us with the arms embargo to Argentina and everything else. So France were on our side. We called them our greatest ally in the war, which in many ways they were. They sent Mirages over here to dogfight against Harriers so we could work out what to do and how to fight against them. Unfortunately, the Mirages actually came out on top every time, but we were using Harrier GR3s, not Sea Harriers. So actually they performed differently. And the French were helping us with some of the ideas on things to do with Exocet. But again, much as we had what I said, the Whitehall War, you can't say it was the British government as one, because it wasn't. It was a war in the corridors of power. It's similar in France. You've got to remember, like I said, that, as I said, President Mitterrand's brother was on the board of Aerospatiale, who made the Exocet missile. Although France didn't send a lot of things to Argentina, they sort of conveniently might have forgotten for a little while that they had a technical team from Dassault who were still in Argentina and were helping to program those missiles to get them onto the aircraft, because the aircraft that they had, the Super Étonnards, used analog systems, whereas the Exocet was digital, and they had to basically get the systems talking to each other so as aircraft could talk to missile, engage with radar, and say, "That target there, got it, yep, hit that." And the technical team from Dassault, the Argentinians said, when asked, did they know about it? They said, yeah, they didn't exactly protest. They didn't exactly go on strike, is what they said. And of course, then there was a shipment of Exocets which was about to go out to Argentina despite the embargo. And Thatcher wrote to Mitterrand. Again, you can find this letter online. She wrote to him and said, if these got there, it might be a serious blow to our future working relationships. And in fact, it could be very, very embarrassing for France if people found out. And then that shipment was stopped. But actually, there was another one from Spain, and the Spanish tipped us off about it. And there was another one from Spain. Oh, they said, but we were okay. That was going to Peru. And it's like, yeah, because the Peruvians are buying the Exocets for the Argentinians. So that's not quite true. Certainly, France was sending right up to right up to the war, and it's conjectured during the war via a roundabout way, but some of the new MM-40, which is still a surface-to-surface missile, did reach Argentina. So Argentina had what was called, if you don't know your exocets, so they had what was called the MM-38, which was a surface-to-surface version. Now, the UK had exocets. We bought a few hundred of them as well. I think we bought about 400 surface-to-surface MM-38 exocets to put on our ships, which were on our ships. But what we did not have was the air-launched. The AM-39 was the air-launched exocet missile. And, of course, it was faster. It had a longer range because, of course, it's not firing from a ship or something basically stationary. It's flying from a moving aircraft. It's already got the acceleration. And so certainly the uprated MM-38, which was the MM-40, had got to Argentina, but it's very cloudy how. And you can argue to a little point that not France per se, but that certain people within France, possibly or not with Mitterrand's knowledge, and probably most likely, almost definitely with his brother's knowledge, were happy to see the Exocet missile in particular go to Argentina, because after the Falklands War, after HMS Sheffield was hit, Exocet sales went through the roof. Everyone wanted them. And in fact, just after the war, Aerospatiale kind of got in trouble because they had the AM-39 on show, an arms show, and it said tested in combat. This was the strapline, successfully tested in combat. And it was like, against us. That wasn't good. So did certain elements in France have a vested interest in potentially Argentina receiving more of these in particular? Did France help Argentina as a nation? No, France was, and it is true, they were a very, very good friend to us, and they backed us a lot. And in fact, they went out of their way to help us in a lot of ways. So much as it is a national sport, a bit of French bashing, unfortunately, one I can't join in on. Some people in France might have had a vested interest in seeing how well Argentina did with French weapon systems. But there was no evidence out there to say that France tried to help Argentina. Certain elements might have done, but France itself did not. I think that's the best way to put it.
Brilliant. I love it. We do have to be nice about France on occasion. Let's do an Argentinian.
Tough, doesn't it?
It feels odd, but let's do an Argentinian one because it doesn't ever really feel odd, especially after the Maradona incident at the World Cup, having a go at the Argentinians. So Argentina used untrained soldiers to fight the war.
Yeah, so this is it's not a clear-cut yes and no. I mean, they did use some untrained soldiers to fight the war, but they also used a lot of very well-trained soldiers to fight the war. So it's a betwixt and between answer. This one isn't sort of a yes or no as such. Now, a lot of the view that people have of the Argentine soldiers is sort of these scared, starved, frozen, ragged conscripts who are all about 12, armed with catapults and sticks and rusty bits of metal that might once have been a gun, just getting stomped on by our boys. And although that caricature, this concept of what they have in Argentina, they call Los Chicos de la Guerra, the boys of the war, which was actually a famous book, and then that saying sort of has been turned against itself, and now they're saying they weren't boys, they were men. But you can actually find variations. I mean, yes, there were guys who were there, be it on the front line or in rear areas, who had 2 weeks training and didn't know what they were doing. That's a fact. But actually, that isn't the sum of it. So if you look at a lot of their units, I mean, firstly, they brought with them 601 and 602 Commando, who were every bit as good as our special forces. And any of the guys who went up against them would tell you that. They even forced sort of in the battles around Mount Kent and trying to move up towards the next line. They even forced some, retreats of our guys. They fought very well at places like Totmalo and things. they were no slouches. They brought with them what they call the BIM 5, or the 5th Battalion Infantry Marine. Now, technically, they were conscripts, but they were a much, much better class, better trained, better equipment, better clothes, better food, better weapons, better morale. They were well trained. If you look at, let's look at the 10th Mechanized Brigade, which was a large amount of all the forces that were around Stanley and in the final battles and things like that. So, for instance, I mean, a lot of them, just from the 10th Mechanized, which was a big feature of that. So when the war was declared, they realized that all their conscripts from what they called the class of 62, in other words, anyone born in 62 who had been called up, would have done their year's national service, and they'd just been let go. They realized they only had, a few raw guys. So what they did is they put out the call, and most of the old guys re-enlisted with the regiment. So the 10th Mechanized went out there. It was probably something between 2/3 to 3/4 of what they call old soldiers. So they had done a year's training and a year's conscription. That year that they'd gone in there, in fact, was the biggest war games that they'd pretty much ever done, and it was a full brigade level exercise with accompanying artillery and aircraft and everything out in the desert. And it was a huge, great big war game. It was like, so these were actually probably the most experienced conscripts that had ever been produced at this time that were out there. And that's just in one brigade. Now, if you look at some of these units, so in the brigade, so the 7th Regiment had done specialized training, commando training with 601 Commando. The 25th Regiment had been put through a 4-week intensive commando training course. This was, this was on top of all their normal stuff. You'll also find like the 3rd, 6th, 7th, and 25th Regiments of that brigade all had to put together a specialized platoon, which is going to be put into an oversized company altogether, and they all underwent specialist commando training as well. So they had proper commando units. They did have some good, the gendarmerie and the quite a few others were good professional units. They had Marine battalions. The 4th Battalion were represented there as well as the 5th. And a lot of their frontline units, although they were not tough professionals, they were not scared little boys. These were guys with a year's service behind them. They knew their officers and their NCOs well. They knew how to handle a weapon, and they'd even undergone very, very intensive war games and exercises, which others hadn't done. So you will get the stories of the scared, starved, ragged conscript, and they did exist, but it wasn't the whole picture, I know, living local to me, there's a para who was at Goose Green, and he did. I mean, at Goose Green, a lot of them were not good quality soldiers at Goose Green, and he even said there was this kid, he looked about 15, and pointed his gun at me, and I just swatted it out of his hand. I put his face on the floor, put my gun in the dirt beside him. I pulled the trigger, and I said, "You're dead. Stay there." Because he said, I didn't want anyone to do anything to him. He was like a scared little kid, and he was sensible enough to stay there, out the way, and not get up again. And you will find, like in Argentina, there's this story. The man is a local hero, a school teacher who suddenly decided it was his patriotic duty to sign up and go to war. And he's well known. The story about him isn't well known, is that he put his class of, I think, 14 and 15-year-old school kids on the bus, told them they were going on a school trip, and then enlisted them all as cadets, and all these kids went out to the Falklands. And you won't find this written down because they all joined in after a few days of shells and bombs and nasty stuff. They all got together, I think it was about 30 of them, kids, and they all had I don't know what weapons they had, but they all had a thing on the count of 3, we'll all shoot each other in the leg. so we get invalided out. And they did. They all shot each other in the leg. And one of these boys, I think someone had missed him maybe or something like that. He'd only got a mild flesh wound. He was so young and so small and tiny and scared that the nurses, the Falkland Islands nurses in King Edward Memorial Hospital in Stanley, actually took this boy in and hid him in broom cupboards, and they smuggled him around. The Argentine soldiers were after him, trying to find him. They knew someone was missing, and they wanted to quickly get rid of this because it was, otherwise they'd look really, really bad. And the nurses hid this poor little boy throughout the war from his own people. So, yeah, you will find these ragged, starved, scared conscripts. But that wasn't the full story. And in fact, even the trouble was the best quality. Let's say the average, the better quality conscript, the class of 62 conscript who had done his year's training already and everything else. Even those guys who were no slouches, they were not cowards. They knew what they were there to do. And, they were prepared to do it. But the problem is when you are freezing cold, when you are utterly starved, and that is true, they simply had no supply system. The men were really hungry, borderline starving. A few even died of starvation and malnutrition. Now, after the war, the Rattenbach report, which was Argentina's own official report, it looked and it said that through basically neglect and maltreatment, most of the units in that war were somewhere between 40 to 50% below combat effectiveness before even a shot was fired. So a lot of people think, they were just scared little kids. They weren't, but, you could have put anyone's soldiers in that front line, starved them, beaten them, made them freezing because you put them out there in summer uniforms, and you'd have probably got near on the same result, But no, they were not scared little boys. You will find that, but that is by no means the full story, shall we say.
So I think we should talk about your biggest myth bust, because it's what you wrote your book about, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So, this is the thing, of course. There's the Falklands War has so many myths and mysteries and everything else. And for a war that is 74 days, it's got more, I think, than any other war, certainly for its longevity. And I think most of that is because between the UK and Argentina, you can look. I mean, we can't even agree on the name of the place. There are no 2 days where both sides agree. You could read a British day-by-day history and then an Argentine day-by-day history, and you would not think it was the same war. Apart from one day, day one, Invasion Day. And that sticks out like a sore thumb because we literally seem to just give Argentina their story. It's the only story we don't say, actually, it was this. And of course, this comes down to, as you say, the famous book that I wrote, The First Casualty, which looked at day one. It was this story of the invasion as told by everyone involved.
So the myth is 60 Royal Marines, as good as laid down for a small group of Argentinian commandos, promptly surrendering after firing off a few shots, killing 1, wounding 3. True or false?
False. Absolutely false. So the British defenders in total, with some, basically 60 Royal Marines, plus the men from the Royal Navy as well who were there, 10 of them. Did they lay down? No, they fought tooth and nail to the very last round. You can read it, and you did read it at the time, as a sort of a ripple of shots, and that was it. And this token defense. In fact, I mean, they are quoted as having fired 6,462 rounds, plus 12 anti-tank rockets. But that isn't even actually close to what they did use up. When they compiled that ammunition expenditure, most of the guys had been up for 48 hours. They fought a battle, and they were on a plane. And they were exhausted, and sort of 2/3 of the guys were asleep. The guys, Naval Party 8901, fought literally tooth and nail with everything a Royal Marine has and everything a Royal Marine knows how to do. And they had absolutely no expectation of surviving that battle. And so sort of First Casualty came to me in a series of happy accidents, I suppose. It was never a book I set out to write, but it was a story that came to me, and I started to look at the invasion story and realized that it was just wrong. It looked wrong. It sounded wrong. And when you started to look at fragments of things the guys had said and the things that the guys had done and some of the evidence out there, you realize this was a really, this story had been woefully undertold. And almost by chance, I started to bump into the British guys. And of course, I was the first person to put them all together. And we started to write First Casualty. But then what happened is the Argentines turned up and said, can we be in it? Because the story they told that day isn't anything like what happened. And it made it sound like we just turned up waving flags. Can we be in it? And I said, brilliant. And then, of course, the Falkland Islanders turned up and said, well, if someone's finally going to write the true story, someone should ask us. And I said, you're absolutely right. And sort of sitting there, head in hands, trying to get your head around the idea that you've just agreed to write the world's first ever three-sided first-person narrative history. It was a task. I don't know if I'd like to do it again, but nobody laid down, nobody surrendered, and this was, for many of them, this was an absolute battle for their lives. And the Argentine casualties, 1 killed, 3 wounded, aren't even credible. The one thing First Casualty did, which no other book has ever done, and I was well aware of this, is it takes the reader into the hospital. The Falklands has only got one hospital, King Edward Memorial Hospital, right there in Stanley, right by the action. And all the killed and wounded and what have you were taken in there. And, I spoke to the doctors and the nurses, and some of them described operations and types of wounds and, what the Argentines were doing with the dead guys. And there was a massive Amtrak APC parked out the back of the hospital, and it was literally rammed full of them. And then they came out and said 1 killed, 3 wounded, and everyone was like, yeah, well, okay, something's up with that. Even a few of the Argentines have admitted it, but it's very hard for them. If they say the wrong thing over there, it's not like here. They could get in serious trouble over there. But yeah, I mean, the casualties, I've heard anything from sort of roughly around sort of 60 to 80 killed and, probably as many wounded or something like that, which is far, far different from 1 killed, 3 wounded.
Yeah, massively different. Before we finish, and you remind everybody about the book, I do just want to quickly ask you, there's a 90-year-old war secret on the files that no one's going to get to look at before 2072. Is this true?
No. No. I know where that comes from. The 2072 files that everyone talks about, the 90-year secret. No, so this was invented by a rather unscrupulous Argentine. He wasn't really a historian as such. He was he'd been in the Air Force. I think he was a pilot who's went on to be a Commodore, and a man called Ruben Oscar Morrow. And Ruben Morrow invented the 2072 secret, basically to sell a particular book called Malvinas Guerra Inaudita, and also a few other books. And the idea is, the premise is that after the war, he claims that he stalked the halls of power around the UK. No one ever met him. No one knows who he is. He's that unimportant. He stalked the halls of power in the UK, where British politicians, generals, and officers and soldiers begged him for anonymity in order to tell the truth. And of course, he just wrote a load of old rubbish. Because who's going to check? By 2072, Morrow's going to be dead. So's everyone else. He was rubber stamped by Brigadier Ernesto Crespo of the Air Force, who literally just said, yeah, what he said, that's true. And it's just become this thing. You can type in 2072 and people still believe it to this day. It doesn't exist. And in fact, after Crespo died, Morrow's pretty much in, I think, the 10th or 12th edition of his book, he's finally actually retracted it. So it isn't just a lie, it's a baseless lie, because even he says it's not true. And he kind of slipped up. Someone said, give me one name of anyone you spoke to. And he sort of blustered and comes up with the name of the Harrier pilot, Harry Trent, because Prince Harry, and Trent is Trent Bridge Cricket, or Trent was an engine as well, of course. And he comes up with the Harrier pilot, Harry Trent, who told him everything. You can look on the SAMA. Harry Trent never existed. The one name he pulled up, and the guy never existed. In fact, it didn't even take British historians to debunk Moro. Argentinian historians did it, because Moro is that unknown outside of Argentina. But he came up with this lie, and people still repeat it to this day, much like the famous myth of HMS Invincible being sunk or being damaged in the war. A load of Argentines still believe that, because that all came out of all the rubbish that Moro wrote. And of course, Invincible was never hit by anything at any time in the war. But you can still see hundreds of pictures and articles of it blowing up and on fire. And, there's whole groups about this, the biggest myth of the war, the Invincible myth. Guaranteed 1,000,000% it was never hit by anything. I've spoke to over 100 members of her crew. It was never hit. So there is no 2072 secret. There are, as I believe, I'm still correct, 519 unopened files on the Falklands War in the UK, but none of them have that date of 2072. That is an absolute myth. And in fact, a lot of these secret files are to do with things Chile was helping us out with, known as Operation Shutter. A few other things. I got sneaked a few little bits. There's certainly bits about the invasion, which showed that everything I wrote in First Casualty was true, which the MOD have actually admitted. And, then a lot of things, I got hold of a few things. A lot of them were just really boring phone conversations between Thatcher and Reagan. And they were, they were not like the smoking gun. They were just really quite dull. So there was no 2072 secret. There was no great myth, even though the Argentines say, on 14th of June 2072, all secrets will be revealed, and the British will actually admit that they had, 300 ships sunk and 10,000 men killed, and that this is what they believe, unfortunately. And it isn't just Moro. I think a lot of other ridiculous sort of pseudo historians have taken this story, because great, if he says it, we can blame him if it's wrong, and then we can just write whatever we like. And this is another reason why the histories between the UK and Argentina are so different, because you get a lot of guys, particularly over in Argentina, just writing a lot of rubbish. And the more rubbish you write, the more it sounds like you did well, the more the people are buying it out there.
You did say this was in the 12th edition. He finally admitted he was lying. So he's already bought a house off the back of it.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I mean, he didn't say I am lying, but he literally omitted any concept of 2072. In fact, basically, unless for a very special reason, all British files were declassified in 2012. And that's all he says, that they were all declassified in 2012. He's just completely moved away from the whole 2072 thing. So, there is no, you will not find a war crime for the Belgrano, which it was not. You will not find any kind of nuclear stuff or, anything ridiculous. You will find stuff, yes, and we have secret files. Every country has secret files. The biggest lie is that Argentina says it's declassified all of its funds, which it hasn't. But there is definitely no 2072 secret. HMS Invincible was never hit. France did not help Argentina. There were no codes. It was not about oil. Belgrano wasn't a war crime, I think, if I haven't said that already. And no, Argentina didn't just send starving, scared little children to war. Some people did. Not all of those answers are clear, but are a clear yes or no. But that's pretty much it. And yes, there's loads more secrets. I could tell you what I know. I'd go to prison for some of the stuff I know, which I'm not going to tell you. But on balance, there is no great smoking gun. But I think the reason we have these rumors and these myths, we've done a lot of myth busting, is that the two sides will simply never agree. And like I said, perhaps the biggest bit of fun, and I would say to anyone, if you have an interest in the Falklands War, or you think it's something you want to pick up with and actually have a good look at it, the story of the Falklands War is not the one you'll read in Wikipedia or probably on Max Hastings or anything like that. Pick up First Casualty and go from there, and you'll suddenly, everything will kind of drop into focus, and you go, I get that. There's a lot more to the war you will not find out there, some of which I might add I've said today. So hopefully your readers can work with that, but if you start with Casualty, you start on the right foot, you will literally understand the war a heck of a lot more.
Thank you so much for coming on to bust Falklands War myths with us. It's been so interesting, and to share some details from the First Casualty. Thank you, because I think this is a great place to start with our first Falklands War episode.
You're more than welcome, and I'm happy. I've got a new book coming out very soon, Last Letters from Stanley. I'd love to come back and talk to you guys about that as well, and pretty much anything. I'm not only that Falklands War guy, but apparently I seem to be that Falklands War guy. So while it's out there and it's interesting and it gives us stuff to talk about, let's do it. And it's always a pleasure to come on and speak to yourselves and speak to people out there and try and give us a bit more dimension about this war, because it fascinates me. It's kind of, my wife calls it the F word in our house because it's said so often. But it fascinates me, and I really hope that you guys and your readers or listeners, I should say, got out of that, because it was, it's something I never tire of talking about and educating people on.
Join us tomorrow when Anna Jameson will be with us to talk all about Love's Madness. This is a really interesting one. I'm not going to tell you any more. Tune in to find out, because it is really, really good. So don't miss that. Don't forget that we do exist on Patreon as History Hack, and on Patreon as well, which is Podbean's own version. Alina and I have had massive fun doing this in 2020, but life's going to change quite a lot next year, and we're going to actually have to go and earn a living, etc. If we want to keep up the regularity that we've been bringing you, and the kind of guests that we've been bringing you, and the workload, then we will need your help. So if you join, there's going to be incentives for joining on either of those platforms. We're revamping ourselves on both of them, so don't forget to go in. You can do as little as $1 a month, and it all goes towards keeping up History Hack as regular as we've been able to bring it to you this year. We are now on YouTube. We are posting all of our new episodes on there, and we have our own channel, and we are gradually posting all of the back episodes, because we have been made aware of the fact that you can only find the last 100 on some platforms. So you can go and listen to your heart's content and laugh at the cartoons and have a great time. So do go over there and subscribe.